It started as a routine flight, until a man shouted at the flight attendant about a dog sitting too close to him. Passengers rolled their eyes. But when the dog calmly sat beside a quiet man in a suit, and that man flashed an FBI badge, the entire cabin fell into silence. No one knew yet, this wasn't just a dog. It was a ticking clock. You've heard stories of air travel gone wrong. Delays, lost luggage, even unruly passengers. But nothing prepared the passengers of Flight 728 for what unraveled at 35,000 feet. They boarded expecting turbulence from weather. They got turbulence from secrets. And at the center of it all was a dog. Flight 728 was already behind schedule, and the mood at Gate B14 was sour. Final boarding call for Flight 728 to Washington, D.C. Marissa Hale adjusted the strap of her carry-on and nudged her teenage daughter, Lily. "Come on, sweetie. Let's just get on and try to sleep this off." Lily, who had been quietly playing a puzzle game on her phone, nodded. "Hope we don't sit near any crying babies." Marissa smiled tiredly. "Or talkative strangers." They walked down the jet bridge, unaware that every step took them closer to something none of the passengers were prepared for. Row 14, Seat B. Kyle Brennan was already seated, his elbows planted on the armrests like he owned them. He had the kind of face that carried a permanent smirk, like he knew something you didn't, and liked it that way. When a golden retriever came padding down the aisle with a red vest labeled service animal, "Do not pet," Kyle's smirk dropped. "Wait, wait, wait," he said, raising his hand like a schoolboy. "This dog is sitting here, next to me?" The flight attendant, Lauren, tried to stay calm. "Yes, sir. She's a registered service animal. She has every right to be on board." Kyle scoffed, shifting his body away dramatically. "I paid good money for extra legroom, not to have fur in my face." The woman holding the dog's leash, tall, silent, in a plain blue blazer, didn't say a word. She simply continued walking with the retriever until they reached their assigned row, 14C. Kyle rolled his eyes, arms crossed. "This is ridiculous. It's a dog. It belongs in a crate, not in a seat." Lauren bent slightly, voice lower now. "Sir, you're welcome to switch seats if there's availability, but the animal is authorized. She better not bark or shed on me." The retriever sat, poised, eyes scanning the cabin like it was calculating every move. That's when the man in the aisle across from them sat down. A tall, composed figure in a pressed black suit. He placed his small briefcase gently beneath the seat and gave a small nod to the woman with the retriever. No words, just a nod. Kyle leaned forward to inspect him. "What's with the men in black look, buddy?" The man didn't respond. That made Kyle scoff again. Figures. Weirdos with dogs and antisocial suits. Great flight. An hour into the flight, the cabin was quiet. Lights dimmed. Passengers dozed off. Movies played on tiny screens. But something in row 14 hadn't settled. Kyle was tapping his foot. Not from turbulence. From frustration. His annoyance hadn't died, it had simmered. He kept glancing at the dog, who stared quietly at the overhead bin, unmoving. Her ears twitched occasionally, almost rhythmically. "You know," Kyle whispered to the woman beside him, "I don't think this dog is even real. It's like a robot, like a military drone or something." The woman didn't respond. Kyle narrowed his eyes. "Is she even yours? You haven't said a word this whole flight." Still no answer. Across the aisle, the man in the suit turned slightly, just enough for Kyle to notice, and then reached into his coat. Kyle tensed. Out came a badge. An unmistakable flash of gold and black. FBI. Kyle blinked. Wait. What? The man leaned toward the woman across the aisle. We're 90 minutes out, he said softly. Stay ready. The dog stood up. Not in aggression. In attention. Every muscle aligned. Flight attendant Lauren passed by, noticing the shift in posture. Is everything okay here? The FBI agent showed her something on his phone, and she froze. Her smile vanished. Understood, she said quietly. She moved briskly toward the cockpit. The pilot's voice came on moments later. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We'll be beginning beverage service shortly. Thank you. Normal. But Marissa in row 22 noticed something strange. One of the attendants took a long, hard look at a man in first class, then returned to the back galley without saying a word. And in the galley, a flight attendant sent a discreet message from the crew phone. Meanwhile, the golden retriever moved again, stepping into the aisle, head slightly lowered, as if tracking something. The man in first class suddenly stood up and began walking down the aisle. He had a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Walked right past Kyle's row. The retriever followed him with her eyes. The FBI agent stood. So did the woman with the dog. No words exchanged. They moved in sync. Kyle was visibly confused now. Okay, what the hell is going on? The man in the black suit looked down at him for the first time. Stay seated. Don't speak. Then, he nodded to the woman, who unclipped something from the dog's vest. A hidden compartment. Inside, a small black device, non-lethal restraints. The dog took the lead and moved swiftly toward the suspicious man, whose stride was now quickening near the lavatories. Sir! The FBI agent's voice boomed. The man turned, eyes wide. Passengers looked up. The dog barked once, sharp, controlled. And then, everything happened in seconds. The man reached into his bag. The dog lunged. The woman followed with stunning speed. And just before panic could erupt, the suspect was face down, pinned, the duffel kicked away. The FBI agent moved to secure the scene. A baby began crying in the back. Lily clutched her mom's hand in row 22. And Kyle? Frozen. The same man who'd complained about the dog now stared at her as she sat calmly beside the restrained suspect. Tail still, chest heaving from exertion. Lauren returned to the aisle. The threat is contained, she announced. Please remain seated. We will continue beverage service shortly. The cabin was silent. The dog had saved them. And Kyle? He whispered, more to himself than anyone else. I was worried about fur on my pants. Kyle Brennan sat motionless in seat 14B, the same seat where, just 15 minutes earlier, he'd loudly complained about a dog. Now, that same dog sat calmly beside a man with an FBI badge, and a would-be attacker lay zip-tied in the aisle, mumbling as agents frisked his duffel. I didn't know, Kyle stammered, more to himself than anyone in particular. I didn't know. Passengers around him still wore expressions of disbelief. Some whispered. Others silently watched as the crew checked for secondary threats. A little boy peeked over a seat, wide-eyed, and asked his mom, "Is the dog a superhero?" In the rear galley, flight attendant Lauren quietly updated the co-pilot. The FBI says the suspect was flagged 2 days ago. Interagency warning. They've been trailing him but couldn't make an arrest on the ground. They needed to catch him with the bag. What's in it? Lauren shook her head. Not explosives, but files, data devices. Possibly state-level intel. Why bring a dog? Lauren glanced toward the front of the cabin. The dog tracked his scent. She wasn't just for show. Row 22, Seat D. Marissa's grip on her daughter's hand hadn't loosened since the incident. You okay? She asked. Lily nodded. That dog. She didn't even bark like crazy. She just knew. Marissa looked toward the aisle. The dog sat again, now beside the woman in the blue blazer, who was quietly speaking with the agent. The woman had a calm strength about her, unmoving, even under the weight of what just occurred. A few rows up, Kyle pulled out his phone. No signal. He looked around, trying to see if anyone else was watching him. They weren't. They were watching the dog. Delta, the agent said quietly, kneeling beside the golden retriever. Nice work. The dog didn't wag her tail. She simply blinked slowly and leaned her head against his knee. Passengers behind them watched in awe. The agent finally turned to the woman in the blue blazer. We'll secure the suspect. We need to maintain appearances for landing. It's critical we don't alert anyone else who might be connected to him. She nodded. Understood. What's her stress level? She's good. Heart rate steady. She always this calm after a takedown? She's built for it. The agent looked toward the aisle. So are you. Kyle stood up slowly, glancing toward the dog. Hey, I didn't mean to be a jerk earlier. No response. He cleared his throat. I mean, she's obviously a really good dog. Still nothing. The woman clipped Delta's leash back onto her vest and looked straight ahead. I said she was shedding. That was dumb, Kyle added awkwardly. Delta finally turned her head slightly, just enough to stare directly at him. Not aggressively, not kindly either, just aware. Kyle sank back into his seat. Okay. Message received. Captain Reynolds pressed his thumb against his earpiece. Repeat that, Tower? The voice on the other end was clipped and official. FBI will meet you at Gate 42 upon arrival. Maintain routine landing procedures. No emergency declaration. Reynolds glanced at his co-pilot. They don't want attention. The co-pilot raised a brow. They always say that when something really big is going down. Reynolds nodded. Let's bring it in smooth. The remaining passengers in the front cabin whispered nervously. A woman leaned over to her husband. Did you see how fast that dog moved? It wasn't just the dog, he replied. That woman moved like a soldier. Maybe she is one. Behind them, another man in first class stared at the lavatory door, then down at his phone. He typed something in an encrypted messaging app. Target in custody. Dog unit involved. Mission compromised. He hesitated before hitting send. But his finger did move, just not toward send. It moved to delete the message instead. He folded the phone closed and inhaled deeply. Delta was still alert, though she appeared relaxed, head resting on her paws. Her ears moved every few seconds, tracking cabin sounds. She noticed something most others didn't. The man in first class who hadn't moved in over 20 minutes was watching her. Not openly, but subtly, too subtly. She stood again. The woman beside her looked at the agent. He nodded. Walk her. The woman unhooked Delta's leash and gently stepped into the aisle. Delta moved slowly, deliberately, head low, tail still. They passed row 15, 16, 17. Passengers turned their heads as she passed. The man in first class looked away, pretending to check his tablet. But Delta stopped. She sat right next to his row. The FBI agent moved fast, his steps silent, but his presence loud. He stepped in beside Delta and leaned toward the man. "Sir, I'm going to need you to come with me." "What? I didn't do anything." "You've been observed transmitting messages related to a federal investigation. Step into the galley." "Is this a joke?" Delta stood again, low growl audible now. Passengers tensed. The man slowly stood. His face was calm. Too calm. He walked down the aisle, escorted by the agent and the woman with Delta. In the galley, he turned. "You think the dog spotted me?" The agent didn't reply. "You're wasting time," the man added with a smirk. "The real message is already out." The woman took out a scanner and swept it across his clothes. The scanner beeped near his wristwatch. The agent raised a brow. "Nice try." The plane descended slowly over the Virginia countryside. Captain Reynolds announced the final approach, asking passengers to secure their trays and return to their seats. Kyle kept glancing at Delta, now resting again by her handler. "I'm going to adopt a dog," he whispered. Marissa, 2 rows behind him, overheard and smiled. "You should," she said softly. "Not for security," he added. "Just because I think I finally get it." The woman beside Delta heard. She didn't speak, but she smiled. Barely. And it was enough. The wheels screeched as Flight 782 touched down at Dulles International Airport. Inside the cabin, passengers collectively exhaled, unaware they'd been holding their breath for most of the descent. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the tarmac. But the mood inside wasn't golden. It was tense, suspicious, quiet. Kyle peeked through the window but couldn't focus on the skyline. He kept thinking about the dog, about how everything, his complaint, the standoff, even the second arrest, had revolved around her. On the jet bridge, 2 plainclothes officers waited with earpieces in. One of them nodded at the signal. The all-clear blink from the co-pilot in the cockpit. The cabin doors opened, but no one was allowed to disembark. Instead, the FBI agent stepped into the front of the cabin and addressed the passengers for the first time. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your cooperation. You may have noticed some unusual activity during this flight. That's because there was a national security investigation underway." Murmurs buzzed across the cabin. 2 individuals on this aircraft were under active surveillance. Both are now in custody. You are not in danger. We are going to allow you to deplane in an orderly fashion shortly. But first, we need to escort our K-9 officer and her handler off the plane. Kyle blinked. "K-9 officer?" The agent nodded to the woman in the navy blazer. She clipped the leash gently and whispered to Delta. The dog stood and padded down the aisle calmly, not seeking attention, not even looking at the passengers she'd protected. But they looked at her, with awe, and something else. Gratitude. Her name was Maya Chen. She didn't talk much. She didn't need to. Years ago, she'd served as a military linguist overseas. After a trauma that left her emotionally distant and medically discharged, she'd rebuilt her life through therapy and service dog training. That's how she met Delta, an abandoned golden retriever puppy left behind after a drug raid. Maya recognized something in Delta that she recognized in herself. Alertness masked by calm. Strength covered by stillness. The FBI hired her not for her combat experience, but for her ability to notice what others didn't. Maya never sought attention. But today, she was the quiet hero who never raised her voice, never pulled a weapon. She just let Delta listen. Delta hadn't smelled fear from the first man. She smelled adrenaline. She smelled metal even though he passed through TSA. She caught the trace of nitrates on the threads of his duffel, remnants of chemistry from God knows where. From the second man, the one in first class, Delta smelled something worse. She smelled anticipation, an odor that humans couldn't detect, but dogs could read like neon lights. And when that scent came wrapped in silence and perfectly ironed sleeves, Delta sat. Because Delta was trained not just to react, but to intervene. As passengers stood and gathered their belongings, Kyle hung back. He didn't want to be the first off the plane. In fact, he wanted to be the last. He needed a moment. When the last group passed, Kyle stepped into the aisle. The woman, Maya, was already out of sight, but he caught a glimpse of Delta near the jet bridge, turning her head back briefly. Kyle paused. "Hey!" he muttered to the agent who lingered near the cockpit. "Yeah, that dog. What happens to her now?" "She goes home. That's it." The agent nodded. "She's done her job. She'll debrief tomorrow." "Dogs get debriefed?" The agent smiled faintly. "In their way, yes." In a secure conference room 2 floors above the terminal, Maya sat with her jacket off, sipping from a plastic water bottle. Delta lay quietly beside her, eyes closed but still listening. The lead investigator entered. "You both did great." Secondary suspect was in deep with an international ring. The watch had a transmitter. Clever. Maya didn't flinch. He was too still. "That always bothers me." The agent smiled. "The dog caught it too?" "She always does. I just follow her lead." He sat down. "You saved a lot of lives today." That message he tried to send could have triggered something worse. Maya exhaled. "It was Delta, not me." He shook his head. "You chose to trust her instincts. That's harder than it sounds." Back in the terminal, passengers finally flooded into the airport. Some cried as they reunited with family. Others sat in stunned silence, scrolling through news apps for any clue of what had really just happened. Kyle didn't do either. He stood near baggage claim, staring at the exit. He almost left. Then he turned back and walked up to the nearest information desk. "Do you know if the dog? The service dog that got off the flight. Is she staying here somewhere?" The clerk blinked. I think she's part of federal security. Probably already gone, sir." Kyle looked disappointed. He hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a crushed protein bar. He smiled to himself and slipped it into the trash. "Guess she doesn't need bribes." Maya sat in the back seat of a black SUV as it pulled onto the beltway. Delta rested her head on her lap, finally letting out a tired sigh. "You were amazing today," Maya whispered. Delta didn't move, but she knew. Her tail tapped lightly once against the seat. Just once. That was enough. By morning, headlines popped up everywhere. Airplane mystery on Flight 782. FBI intervenes mid-air. Dog hero K9 stops suspected intel smuggling operation. Bust in Silhouette 2 arrested, but authorities keep details sealed. No one outside the agency knew Maya's name. No one posted Delta's face. The media asked questions. The FBI said nothing. Just one quiet press release. A federal K9 unit and its handler played a critical role in neutralizing a threat aboard a commercial flight yesterday evening. No passengers were harmed. Investigation is ongoing. That night, a blurry cell phone video hit Reddit. A teenage girl had secretly recorded the moment Delta sat beside the suspect in first class. The video had no audio, but the tension was obvious. Within hours, the video had 2.4 million views. Comments flooded in, "Is this real? That dog knew. This is why you never mess with service animals. Golden retrievers are too powerful. Ban them. JK don't." Kyle saw the video. He sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, wearing the same clothes from the flight. He didn't comment. He just watched it again and again. She sat on the couch with Delta, now curled up beside her. Maya reached down and pulled out an old photo album. Delta as a puppy. Tiny, wild-eyed, chewing on everything. One photo showed them together during their first certification. Delta had a paw on Maya's knee. They both looked whole, but they hadn't been then. They'd become whole together. And now, they were a team people would never forget, even if they never knew their names. 3 days had passed since Flight 782. Most passengers had returned to their routines. Job meetings, grocery lists, scrolling through news like it never happened. But Kyle couldn't, because it had happened, and because one part of it didn't sit right. A small detail had wedged itself in his brain like a splinter. Why had the second man, the calm one, gotten on the plane only moments before boarding closed? And why did the dog sit without being commanded? Kyle wasn't a detective, but he had Google, and too much time on his hands. On an obscure message board, buried beneath threads about flight delays and TSA horror stories, Kyle found a comment from a user named Watchdog. It read, "It wasn't the barking dog. It was the silent one. Check the manifest. Row 2B didn't belong to him." Kyle's blood ran cold. 2B was the man in the sleek suit, the one Delta chose to sit next to. Kyle leaned forward and looked up public airline seating registries. Nothing concrete, but an unconfirmed manifest from a frequent flyer forum listed 2B as belonging to a woman named Beatrice Langston. Kyle had seen no woman there. So who was the man in 2B? And why was he using someone else's seat? Another search confirmed it. Beatrice Langston had died 6 months earlier in a boating accident near Charleston. Her name shouldn't have been on the manifest at all. Someone used a stolen identity and slipped through security. Even more chilling, Kyle discovered that Ms. Langston's government ID had never been officially flagged as deceased, meaning it could have been used at any TSA checkpoint without raising alarms. Was this an accident or a test run? Kyle's fingers trembled as he shut his laptop. Delta sniffed a cardboard box placed on a low table in a scent lab. She gave a low whine, circled once, then sat. A match. Maya jotted it down. Across the room, Agent Patel looked impressed. That's 3 connections from the same man's luggage. Traces of PTN, methylamine, and something else. She's practically an evidence magnet. Maya smiled, but only for a second. Then she said quietly, "This wasn't random." "You mean the suspect?" "I mean the flight. They chose that route for a reason." "What do you think the endgame was?" Maya looked at Delta, who stared back as if she knew. "I don't know, but I think we stopped it just in time." Later that afternoon, Maya was called into a briefing. A digital map stretched across a screen, showing flight paths, cargo manifests, and encrypted data intercepts. What the team revealed made her skin crawl. Flight 782 had been one of 3 flights with flagged activity. One landed in Berlin. One never took off. But hers? Hers had been the only one with a K9 unit. One of the suspects had texted a code phrase before arrest. The carrier did not reach the nest. Maya stared at the line of text. What was the carrier? A device. Patel shook his head. No. Worse. The carrier wasn't a device. It was a person. Someone unknowingly carrying contaminated material, or worse, a biological agent sealed inside something innocuous. An air marshal's glove compartment? A pen with an altered ink reservoir? The true payload was never found. But they suspected Delta's reaction had prevented a critical transfer. Because the calm man in 2B? He was a courier. The loud guy in economy? Just a distraction. They'd been played against each other, and the FBI almost missed it. Almost. But not for the dog. Unable to sit with the mystery, Kyle emailed the FBI tip line. He didn't expect a reply, but to his shock, he got a phone call 2 hours later. A woman's voice. "We saw your message. We don't typically respond, but your observation about the manifest was insightful. Who is this?" "You can call me Chun." Kyle blinked. "The handler." She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. "I just wanted to say, Delta saw something in you. Something that made her sit down when you stood up." Kyle scoffed. "She probably just liked the snack in my bag." Maya paused. "She only accepts food from people she trusts." Something in Kyle's chest twisted. He swallowed hard. "Do you think? Is it over?" There was a long pause on the line. Then she said, "I think it's just beginning." 2 days later, a new operation launched. This time, the FBI wouldn't wait for danger to come to them. They were going to intercept it, with Delta as their front line. Maya clipped the leash and whispered, "Let's go, girl." Delta wagged once, then stood. They walked out of the building, not toward an office, but toward a black van with tinted windows and no plates. Inside were 4 agents suited up and ready. Delta hopped in like she belonged there, because she did. Flight 912 was headed to Reykjavik. The agents didn't say much as they took their seats, strategically spaced throughout the plane. Maya sat in premium economy with Delta curled at her feet. She felt the weight of every stare. A child across the aisle beamed. "Mommy, look, a puppy." Maya smiled politely, but her mind was a million miles away. She wasn't flying. She was hunting. Halfway through the flight, Delta's ears twitched. Then she stood. No command. No signal. Maya followed her eyes and saw a man in row 8 slide a briefcase under another passenger's seat while pretending to stretch. Maya tapped her earpiece. Target identified. Row 8. Sleeveless jacket. Delta confirmed behavior anomaly. She stood. But before she could move further, the man bolted from his seat. He ran toward the cockpit. Panic erupted. But Delta leapt into the aisle, barking once. Deep and sharp. The sound froze the man mid-step. Then agents surrounded him. The briefcase was recovered. The passenger he tried to plant it on? An unknowing diplomat headed to a conference in Iceland. Inside the case, blueprints, chemical vials, and a watch just like the one from Flight 782. After landing, agents swarmed the tarmac. No press, no statements, just swift, silent efficiency. Delta sat on the runway, watching as the suspect was loaded into a separate van. She didn't bark. She didn't flinch. She simply waited. Maya stroked her fur gently. 2 for 2. Delta leaned her head into Maya's chest. They didn't need medals. They needed rest. 1 week later, Kyle received a package. No return address. Inside was a single photo. Delta in uniform, seated proudly beside Maya, both staring at the camera. And on the back, just one sentence handwritten. Sometimes the quietest ones save the most lives. The news never broke. No front-page headlines. No exclusive interviews. No airport security updates. The near catastrophes aboard Flight 782 and Flight 912 were buried so deeply in intelligence files that even some high-ranking officials never saw them. But those who lived through them, they couldn't forget. Especially Maya, and especially Kyle. The autumn air in Virginia was crisp and smelled faintly of pine. Maya stood in the training field at Quantico, arms crossed, eyes focused on Delta, who was mid-drill. "Check," she commanded. Delta darted forward, sniffing 3 backpacks lined up on a bench. She paused at the 3rd, then sat. Maya nodded to the instructor. Simulated explosive compound. She nailed it. Again. the instructor said. Higher stakes this time. But Maya's gaze lingered on Delta. She hesitated, then spoke softly, almost to herself. She's tired. The instructor frowned. She's fine. We need her ready. Maya crouched down and placed her hand gently on Delta's side. She's not a machine. She saved more lives in 2 weeks than some agents do in 20 years. She's done enough. Back in Arizona, Kyle had stopped doom-scrolling flight manifest forums. Instead, he'd started something new. A blog. Not just about dogs on planes, but about unnoticed heroes. Canines, handlers, flight attendants, everyday people who stop disasters before they start. His latest post had gone viral. The golden dog who sat next to me and saved a plane without barking. He didn't name Delta or Maya, but his words reached the people who needed to read them, especially a retired flight captain named Lester Dean, who wrote in a comment, I remember a similar dog on my last flight. She sat beside a woman who looked like she'd seen everything. The dog never moved. I felt safer just knowing she was there. Kyle stared at the comment for a long time, then quietly replied, You were. 2 days later, Maya was called into the assistant director's office. We've got another assignment for Delta. Surveillance on a diplomat plane to Tel Aviv. Maya didn't answer immediately. The man tapped his desk. Problem? Yes, she said plainly. I think it's time she retires. The director stared at her. Do you have a replacement? No, but she's not replaceable. You're aware this would remove you from active fieldwork as well? Maya nodded. The director sighed. You really believe she's done? Maya looked down at her badge, then at the dog waiting patiently outside the glass doors. I think she's earned the right to be done. Maya and Delta flew one last time, this time not on assignment, but on a quiet commercial flight to a small town in North Carolina. Maya's family had land there. Big fields. No alarms. No airplanes. Just open sky. Delta slept the whole flight with her head on Maya's foot. A flight attendant stopped by and whispered, She's beautiful. Is she working? Maya smiled gently. She was. Delta now chased butterflies in the fields, napped under pecan trees, and barked only when deer wandered too close to the porch. But her instincts hadn't faded. One rainy afternoon, a neighborhood kid wandered into the woods and didn't return. Panicked parents called for hours. Flashlights, shouting, drones. Nothing worked. Then Maya opened her back door and said just one word. Go! Delta ran. Straight into the trees. She returned 30 minutes later, barking, tail wagging, and led them straight to a small ravine where the child had slipped and gotten stuck in the mud. That moment made the local news. But no one connected it to Flight 782. And that was just fine. Because real heroes didn't need credit. They just needed purpose. One morning, Maya found a package on her doorstep. No return label. Inside was a worn airline badge and a small stuffed golden retriever holding a note. It read, Thought she might need a friend on the ground. From someone who owes her his life. It was from Kyle. Attached was a photo. The selfie he'd taken back on Flight 782 with Delta sleeping beside him, just before the chaos began. Below it, he'd written, She didn't just stop a disaster. She changed everything I believe about courage. On the anniversary of Flight 782, Maya and Delta stood at the edge of a quiet airport observation deck. Delta, now older, leaned against her gently. Planes took off and landed, streaking across the sky. Maya knelt beside her and whispered, You never got a medal. No news story. But if they only knew. She paused, then smiled. Doesn't matter, does it? Delta wagged her tail once, and the sky above roared with the sound of a new plane. One more flight that would land safely. Because somewhere out there, someone like Delta had already done their job. In a world obsessed with noise, alarms, headlines, outrage, it was the quietest act of all that made the greatest impact. A dog sitting down, a handler trusting her instincts, a passenger choosing kindness over ego, and a mission stopped before anyone even realized it had begun. Flight 782 had been forgotten by the world, but not by the lives it silently saved, and certainly not by the golden retriever who proved that sometimes you don't need to bark to be heard. Thanks for watching Folded Hands. If this story touched your heart, made you think twice about the quiet heroes among us, or simply gave you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Paw prints. Sometimes, the most extraordinary acts come from those we least expect. Like a service dog silently changing the course of fate at 30,000 feet. Thank you for being part of this journey. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and always listen when a dog sits beside you.